The beeping of machines echoed like a metronome of dread inside the most expensive hospital suite in America. $5 million had transformed this single room into something between a palace and a laboratory. Polished mahogany walls disguised the oxygen lines. Crystal chandeliers reflected off sterile white floors. Even the ventilators had been designed with sleek chrome finishes, as though wealth itself could make sickness elegant. But no amount of luxury could mask the truth. A billionaire was dying. Robert Kane, one of the richest men in the United States, lay pale and trembling beneath Egyptian cotton sheets. His lips had lost their color. His breathing came in uneven gasps. His body, once celebrated in Forbes magazine photos as robust, commanding, untouchable, now looked small against the vast bed frame. Surrounding him were America's finest minds, 20 specialists flown in from Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and beyond. Each carried the authority of years of research and stacks of accolades. They spoke in precise language, their jargon cutting the silence: liver enzymes unstable, peripheral neuropathy worsening, renal function compromised. Their clipped phrases filled the room like puzzle pieces that refused to fit. The billionaire's family watched helplessly from behind glass. The doctors frowned, adjusting charts, scrolling through test results on glowing tablets. Millions of dollars of machinery blinked and hummed. CT scans, dialysis systems, neural monitors, each one promising answers, each one delivering only more confusion. The suite, meant to be a sanctuary of healing, had become a theater of failure. "His body's shutting down," murmured one neurologist, voice tight. "We've ruled out autoimmune cascades." Another countered. "Then why do the symptoms present across multiple systems?" snapped a third. The debate circled endlessly, voices rising and falling in frustration. Yet none of them had an answer. And yet, someone did. In the corner of the room, nearly invisible, sat a little girl. Her name was Amara Johnson, only 9 years old. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really. Her mother worked in the hospital's cleaning staff, and on long evening shifts, Amara would sit quietly with a worn notebook in her lap, sketching, listening, waiting until it was time to walk home together. The doctors never acknowledged her presence. To them she was just background. A child with braided hair and bright eyes, perched silently on a chair far too big for her. But while the doctors debated theories and dismissed possibilities, Amara's eyes never stopped moving. She studied the billionaire's shaking hands. She noticed the faint yellow tinge beneath his fingernails. She stared at the way his hair had thinned unevenly at the crown. She caught details no one else seemed to see. Details that didn't require a medical degree, only patience, curiosity, and an eye trained by countless hours of watching while no one watched her back. The room was thick with authority, the kind of authority that came with titles, framed diplomas, and reputations built over decades. And yet, despite all their power, these 20 doctors stood on the edge of failure. Only one person in the room saw the truth. Not the decorated experts, not the machines worth millions, not the hospital that prided itself on being untouchable. It was the little girl in the corner. She clutched her notebook tighter, heart pounding with a recognition she couldn't ignore. The pieces clicked together in her young mind like puzzle parts falling into place. The symptoms weren't random, they weren't unconnected, they were classic, textbook. If only someone would pay attention. She was only 9, but she recognized the pattern none of the experts saw. Amara Johnson didn't look like someone who could change the fate of a billionaire. At just 9 years old, she was small for her age, her thin frame wrapped in a hand-me-down sweater that had weathered too many winters. Her sneakers were scuffed, one lace frayed to threads. She carried no titles, no lab coat, no clipboard. She wasn't even supposed to be inside the hospital's restricted wing, yet here she was, legs dangling from an oversized leather chair meant for executives. To the doctors, Amara was invisible. Her mother, Denise Johnson, worked night shifts on the hospital's cleaning staff. With no one to watch Amara after school, Denise brought her along, whispering the same instructions every night. "Stay quiet, baby. Stay out of the way." Amara obeyed. She had mastered the art of stillness, the survival skill of being present without being noticed. But invisibility had its advantages. No one looked at her, which meant no one guarded their words around her. Doctors muttered theories as if she weren't there. Nurses vented frustrations within earshot. Visitors spoke freely in hushed voices, never lowering them for the quiet girl with braids in the corner. Amara listened to it all. She always listened, and she noticed things too. Things other people's eyes skimmed past. Her battered notebook sat open on her lap, pages crowded with doodles, puzzle grids, and careful sketches of shapes and patterns. She loved patterns. At the library she devoured books that few children touched, volumes on chemistry, diagrams of plants and minerals, encyclopedias of odd diseases. She didn't always understand the big words, but she memorized the pictures, the symptoms, the way one clue connected to another like puzzle pieces. Now in this hospital suite dripping with wealth, Amara's dark eyes moved restlessly from the billionaire's fragile body to the doctors swarming around him. She saw the way his hand trembled against the sheets. She noticed the faint yellow tint under his nails, the uneven patches where his hair thinned at the crown. She studied the strange discoloration tracing the edge of his gums. The doctors didn't seem to see any of it, or if they did, they dismissed it as meaningless. But Amara couldn't look away. Her mind buzzed, flipping through the catalog of images she'd stored over the years. Somewhere she had seen this before. She couldn't remember where, couldn't drag the memory all the way into focus, but the whisper of recognition prickled down her spine. It was like holding the corner of a puzzle piece and knowing exactly where it fit without being able to reach the rest of the picture. Her small hand tightened around the notebook. She wanted to say something, to point out what her eyes caught, but the weight of the room pressed down on her. 20 specialists filled the air with authority. She was just a child, the cleaner's daughter perched quietly in the shadows, so she stayed silent. For now, but her gaze lingered. Her pulse quickened. The pattern was there, clear, undeniable. It meant something, something the doctors weren't seeing. The billionaire's room pulsed with controlled chaos. Monitors beeped in anxious rhythm. Specialists in immaculate suits and white coats shuffled charts, whispering diagnoses that contradicted each other. Words like neurological degeneration, autoimmune cascade, and multisystem failure filled the air, impressive, authoritative, and utterly useless. Because none of it was saving Robert Kane. Despite the finest machines money could buy, despite the 20 specialists at his bedside, the billionaire's condition deteriorated hour by hour. His skin had gone pale as paper, his breath shallow, his once commanding voice reduced to strained whispers. The man who had towered in boardrooms and bent entire industries to his will now lay powerless, shrinking beneath silk sheets. For all their brilliance, the doctors were failing, and everyone knew it. Behind the glass wall his family watched with wide eyes, powerless to intervene. Nurses exchanged nervous glances as lab results returned inconclusive again and again. Even the hospital director had been called, hovering nervously in the hall, terrified of headlines. Billionaire dies under care of America's best doctors. The stakes couldn't be higher. A life hung in the balance, but so did reputations, careers, the image of an entire hospital empire. And yet, the injustice ran deeper. Because while the powerful obsessed over appearances, a quiet child in the corner noticed details no one else did. Amara sat small and unnoticed, her notebook balanced on her knees. She had written down everything: the billionaire's trembling hands, the strange shade beneath his nails, the way his hair seemed to fall in uneven patches. She wasn't sure yet what it meant, not fully, but the clues burned in her mind. She wanted to speak. She wanted to tell them what she saw. But children weren't invited into these conversations. A tall cardiologist glanced at her once, eyebrows raised as if to ask why a little girl was even in the room. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. His eyes said it all. "You don't belong here." Moments later, one of the senior physicians cleared his throat. "Could the cleaning staff finish quickly?" he asked, not bothering to look in Denise Johnson's direction. The words stung, sharp as glass. Amara's mother nodded quietly, head down, clutching her mop handle with white knuckles. She knew better than to argue. Amara felt her chest tighten. They weren't just dismissing her mother, they were dismissing her too. In their world, cleaners were invisible, their children were shadows. But Amara saw what they missed. Her pencil scratched faster across the notebook, sketching tiny lines, arrows, connections. Her heart pounded with urgency. She leaned toward a nurse she trusted, a woman who sometimes smiled at her in passing. "Ma'am," Amara whispered, voice trembling. "His nails, his gums, doesn't that mean something?" The nurse frowned gently, placing a finger to her lips. "Sweetheart, this is very serious. Let the doctors handle it." Dismissed again. Amara sank back into her chair, cheeks burning. She pressed her palms against her notebook, as if to protect her fragile observations from the world that refused to see her. Meanwhile, the billionaire groaned, his body racked with tremors. Machines blared warnings. Doctors barked orders. Another round of tests was ordered, another battery of scans, another ocean of data that would lead nowhere. Amara's stomach churned with helplessness. She knew the pattern meant something. She didn't have the language to explain it, not yet, but she felt the truth pressing against her mind like a secret only she could hear, and the injustice deepened. Here was a man worth billions, surrounded by the most brilliant specialists in America, yet the answer was sitting in the corner, inside the notebook of a 9-year-old girl nobody noticed. Every second ticked louder. The billionaire's condition worsened, and Amara's silence weighed heavier. She thought about standing up, about blurting it out, but she could already hear the laughter in her imagination. What could a little black girl possibly know that 20 doctors didn't? So she swallowed the words and said nothing. But deep down she made a quiet promise to herself. If the doctors kept failing, she wouldn't stay invisible forever. Because Robert Kane was running out of time, and she was the only one in the room who had seen the pattern. The hospital suite glowed with the soft hum of machines and the muted shuffle of polished shoes. The billionaire's condition slipped lower, but the doctors kept circling the same loop of theories, chasing shadows instead of answers. Then the door opened, and a new figure entered. He wasn't dressed like hospital staff. His suit was tailored, his tie silk, his watch gleaming with understated power. On his chest hung a visitor's badge. Ethan Caldwell, it read. Billionaire Robert Kane's longtime associate and business rival turned friend. I brought something for him. Caldwell announced smoothly, holding a slim black bag. His tone carried the easy authority of someone used to being obeyed. The doctors barely looked up. They were too consumed by charts and numbers. From her corner, Amara's eyes narrowed. She watched closely as Caldwell unzipped the bag and pulled out a sleek silver thermos and a dark glass jar. His favorite, Caldwell said with a faint smile. He insists it comforts him. Won't rest without it. Imported, of course. Best brand there is. He placed the items carefully on the nightstand, arranging them with deliberate precision, as though he wanted them to be noticed. The doctors offered polite nods, then returned to their arguments. None of them questioned the objects. None of them considered that anything so ordinary could matter. But Amara couldn't look away. Her gaze lingered on the jar. The glass caught the light strangely, reflecting with a faint shimmer. She leaned forward slightly, straining her eyes. For just a second, she thought she saw something unusual in its surface, a metallic glint where there shouldn't have been one. She scribbled quickly in her notebook. Jar, shimmer, wrong. Later that night, while her mother polished the bathroom fixtures, Amara returned to the corner of the room. The billionaire's shallow breathing rattled through the monitors. Doctors had retreated for a break, leaving only the steady pulse of machines. Her eyes flicked to the nightstand. The jar hadn't been there yesterday, and now, tonight, she thought she could smell something faint in the air. Not antiseptic, not cologne, something sharper, metallic, out of place. She scribbled again. Smell, not right. Her young mind raced. She remembered the diagrams she had seen in her borrowed science books. Illustrations of strange poisons, of dangerous substances masked in ordinary containers. She didn't know why the memory surfaced now, but she trusted it. She looked at the billionaire again. His hands trembled. His hair seemed thinner than the day before. his gums darker, and every time she looked back at the jar, the connection pulled tighter. Still, she said nothing. What could she say? That she suspected a fancy jar brought in by a wealthy visitor was somehow linked to the billionaire's collapse. That a child with a library card and a notebook saw what 20 world-class specialists didn't. No one would listen. But Amara couldn't forget. She couldn't stop looking at the object, as if it were whispering to her, daring her to uncover its secret. It was just a jar. Just a simple, ordinary container. Yet something about it was wrong, terribly wrong. The next morning began with another alarm. Machines shrieked in frantic rhythm as Robert Kane's chest heaved. Doctors flooded the suite, shouting orders over one another. Nurses rushed with IV bags, monitors, syringes. The billionaire's skin gleamed with sweat, his lips trembling around shallow gasps. Neurological collapse is worsening. One specialist barked, kidney functions dropping fast. Another countered, get him on dialysis now, demanded a third. The chaos built like a storm. Yet amid all the movement, Amara noticed the detail no one else did. The sleek black jar had been used again. She saw the smear of cream glistening on Kane's trembling hands, saw the faint metallic sheen as the light shifted across his skin. Her small fingers tightened around her notebook. This wasn't coincidence. She knew it. When the crisis settled, the room fell into a weary hush. The doctors retreated to the corner to argue over test results. Amara slipped from her chair and tugged at the sleeve of a young nurse she trusted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, I think it's the jar," she said, eyes wide. "The cream, it makes him worse every time." The nurse frowned kindly, crouching to meet her gaze. "Sweetheart, that's thoughtful of you, but you shouldn't worry yourself with these things. Let the doctors handle it, okay?" "No, listen," Amara insisted, whispering faster. "Yesterday he was weaker after they used it, and today he almost—" She stopped herself, breath trembling. "I think it's hurting him." But the nurse only patted her shoulder gently, as though quieting a child's nightmare. "You're very observant, but sometimes things look connected when they're not. Be brave for your mama, okay?" Dismissed. Again, Amara sank back into her chair, cheeks burning. She opened her notebook and scribbled furiously. "Cream, every time worse they don't see." The injustice cut deep. She wasn't trying to play doctor. She wasn't trying to pretend. She just noticed, and nobody cared. That afternoon, as her mother polished the brass fixtures in the hall, Amara overheard two junior doctors muttering. "This case makes no sense," one said. "The symptoms overlap like 5 different diseases. The tests aren't lining up," the other replied. "Everything we run comes back inconsistent." Amara clutched her notebook tighter. They couldn't see the pattern, but she could. When Ethan Caldwell returned that evening, the tension inside her chest nearly burst. He strolled in with his same polished calm, carrying another jar of the same imported cream. "Robert insists on it," he said with a smirk, setting it prominently on the nightstand. Amara's pulse hammered. She scribbled in her notebook again. Every visit new jar, every visit worse, but she didn't dare speak. Her mother's warning echoed in her mind. "Don't cause trouble. Don't give them a reason to send us away." That night, Amara watched from the hallway as his body convulsed again. Doctors shouted. Nurses rushed. The billionaire's monitors screamed. A code blue echoed over the intercom. Amara's small body shook as she pressed herself against the cold wall, tears stinging her eyes. If she stayed silent, he would die. But if she spoke, they would laugh. Or worse, her mother would lose her job, the only income keeping them afloat. The weight of both truths crushed her. Later, when the chaos subsided, Amara slipped into the empty room. The billionaire slept fitfully, his breath shallow, machines humming around him. On the nightstand the jar sat open, its surface shimmered faintly in the dim light, that strange metallic gleam she couldn't ignore. She reached out a trembling finger, dipped it lightly, then pulled back instantly. The smell was faint but wrong, sharp, metallic, almost bitter. She wiped her finger quickly on a tissue, heart racing. Her notebook opened on the bed beside her. She drew feverishly, sketching the jar, the billionaire's hands, the discoloration she saw on his nails and gums. She didn't know the name yet, but she knew the pattern. She knew it meant something. She just had to make someone believe her. The next day she tried again. She approached a young resident, a doctor with kind eyes who often stayed later than the others. "Sir," she whispered, holding up her notebook. "Please look. Every time he uses this," she pointed to the jar sketched on the page. "He gets worse. It's not random. It's the same." The resident frowned, flipping through her drawings. For a second his eyes softened with surprise, but then he shook his head. "That's an interesting idea," he said carefully. "But heavy metals and toxins, that's not something a child could diagnose. We've already tested everything." "But what if the tests missed it?" Amara pressed, her small hands trembling. "What if it's not in the blood?" "But," he cut her off, glancing nervously at the hallway, "you need to leave this to the professionals. If anyone hears me talking like this, it'll be my job. Be careful, okay?" He closed the notebook gently and handed it back. Then he walked away, leaving Amara standing small and silent in the corridor, invisible. Again, her heart pounded with frustration. She was only 9, but she could see what the experts couldn't, and no one, not the nurses, not the residents, not even her own mother, would believe her. But deep down she made herself a promise. She wouldn't stop, not until someone listened, because Robert Kane's time was running out, and Amara was the only one who could save him. Amara lay awake that night, staring at the cracked ceiling of their small apartment. The sounds of the city drifted through the window, car horns, the distant hum of trains, but her mind was trapped inside the hospital suite. The jar, the shimmer, the smell, and Robert Kane's failing body, growing weaker each time the cream touched his skin. She clutched her notebook against her chest like a shield. No one would listen. Not the nurses, not the residents, not even her mother, who had begged her to stay quiet. But if Amara stayed silent, the billionaire would die, and she would have to live knowing she had seen the truth and done nothing. The thought made her stomach twist. By morning, her decision was made. She wasn't going to wait for anyone to believe her. She would prove it herself. That afternoon, while her mother mopped floors on the lower wing, Amara slipped back into Kane's suite. The doctors had stepped out for a consultation, the nurses rotating between shifts. For a rare few minutes, the room was nearly empty. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she crept toward the nightstand. The black glass jar sat there, elegant and harmless to everyone but her. Her fingers trembled as she unscrewed the lid. The faint metallic odor met her nose again, unmistakable now. Quickly she pulled a small plastic sandwich bag from her pocket, one she had taken from home that morning, and scooped a fingertip of the cream inside. She sealed it, double-folded it, and slid it into the pages of her notebook. Her chest tightened. She had just crossed a line. If anyone saw her, her mother could lose her job. They could both be banned from the hospital forever, but she had no choice. In the cafeteria, Amara scavenged supplies, a paper cup, a plastic spoon, a few packets of baking soda. From a supply closet, she borrowed a roll of aluminum foil and an old dropper bottle. None of it looked like lab equipment, but to Amara, it was enough. She remembered a page from one of her library science books, crude experiments to detect metals. The details were fuzzy, but the principle was simple. If something reacted in the presence of certain chemicals, it revealed what was hidden. She worked quickly in a quiet corner of the cafeteria, shielding her hands with her notebook. She smeared a tiny bit of the cream into the paper cup, mixed it with water, then added the baking soda. She stirred with the plastic spoon, heart hammering. At first, nothing happened. Then, a faint change. The water clouded, shifting to a dull, sickly tint. The smell sharpened. Her pulse raced. She tore off a piece of aluminum foil, dropped it into the mixture, and held her breath. Slowly, unmistakably, the surface shimmered with a reaction. Not like ordinary lotion, not like anything harmless. Her eyes widened. She didn't know the exact name yet, but she knew what this meant. The cream wasn't what it claimed to be. It carried something toxic, something powerful enough to break down a billionaire's body piece by piece. Her small hands trembled as she scribbled the results in her notebook. Reaction visible. Not safe, not normal. She stared at the words, her chest tight with both triumph and fear. She had proof, but proof meant nothing if no one saw it. That evening, Amara tried once more. She slipped into the residence path in the hallway, holding up her notebook with the bagged sample taped inside. "Please," she begged. "I tested it. Look, it reacts. It's poison. That's why he's sick." The young doctor's face went pale. For a moment it seemed he might actually believe her, but then his expression hardened, fear flickering in his eyes. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. Amara hesitated, then whispered, "From his room." The doctor's jaw tightened. "Do you realize how dangerous that is, if anyone finds out you're mother?" He stopped, glancing around the hallway. "I can't be part of this, I'm sorry." And he walked away, leaving Amara clutching her notebook in silence. Her throat burned, tears threatening. She had risked everything, and still no one would listen. But she knew, deep down she knew she was right, and if the adults wouldn't act, she would. That night, as Robert Kane's vitals dipped lower, Amara sat in the waiting lounge, staring at the city lights beyond the glass. The notebook lay open on her lap, the bagged sample hidden inside. She whispered to herself, voice steady despite the tears in her eyes, "They think I'm invisible, but I see what they don't." Her jaw tightened. Tomorrow she would make them listen, even if it meant standing in front of all 20 doctors, even if it meant risking everything. Because Robert Kane's time was almost gone, and Amara was the only one who had proof of what was killing him. The hospital air felt heavier that morning, thick with the weight of impending loss. Robert Kane's condition had worsened overnight. His vital signs dipped lower, his body weakening to the edge of collapse. Doctors gathered in a tense circle at the foot of his bed, 20 specialists who had run out of ideas. Charts flickered on glowing tablets, lab results stacked high in their hands. They spoke in clipped tones, voices sharp with urgency and failure. "We've exhausted autoimmune pathways. Neurological scans are inconclusive." Every standard toxicology panel came back negative, and yet the billionaire lay dying. Amara stood at the edge of the room, notebook pressed against her chest. She had spent the night staring at her crude test, at the cloudy water and shimmering residue that proved the cream wasn't safe. She had begged doctors. She had whispered to nurses. No one had listened. But today she would not be silent. The meeting began. Dr. Hamilton, the chief specialist, clearing his throat with weary gravity. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. Mr. Kane is slipping. Unless we identify the root cause immediately, we are watching a preventable death unfold under our care." The silence that followed was suffocating. Amara's pulse thundered in her ears. Her palms were slick with sweat as she clutched her notebook. Her mother stood across the room, eyes begging her to stay quiet, to stay safe. But Amara shook her head slightly. She couldn't, not anymore. Before fear could stop her, she stepped forward. Her voice cracked but rang clear in the sudden silence. "I know what's wrong with him." Heads turned. Eyebrows arched. 20 pairs of incredulous eyes fell on the little girl in the corner. Dr. Hamilton frowned. "Young lady, this is a private medical conference. Please step outside." Amara's knees trembled, but she held her ground. "No, please, listen. You've all missed something. It's not a random. It's not autoimmune. It's not neurological. It's poison." A ripple of laughter and murmur swept through the room. One of the doctors muttered, "This is absurd." Another shook his head. "Get her out of here before." But Amara's small voice rose higher, steadier. "Every time he uses the cream, he gets worse." She yanked open her notebook, flipping to the page where she had taped the bagged sample. Her drawings filled the margins. The billionaire's yellowed nails, the uneven hair loss, the darkened gums, arrows pointing to the sleek black jar. "Look," she cried, holding it up. The symptoms line up: tremors, hair loss, nerve damage, stomach pain. I tested the cream. It reacts. It's poison. That's what's killing him. For a moment, silence. Then Dr. Hamilton slammed his folder shut. Enough. Security. But before he could finish, a younger physician, Dr. Rivera, leaned forward, his brow furrowed, eyes scanning the child's notebook. "Wait," he murmured. "Her observations, they're consistent. These symptoms," he looked at the others. "Doesn't this sound like thallium toxicity?" The room froze. Another doctor blinked, realization dawning. Hair loss, neuropathy, gastrointestinal decline. "It does fit," Dr. Hamilton scoffed, but his voice had lost certainty. "That's ridiculous. Thallium is rare. We ran standard panels. Standard panels could miss it if it's administered gradually." Dr. Rivera interrupted, eyes bright. He pointed at Amara's sketches. "She's right about the progression. Each exposure worsens the condition." Amara stepped closer, voice trembling but resolute. "It's the cream. The man in the suit. He brings it every day. He puts it where Mr. Kane will use it. That's how it's getting inside him." Gasps rippled through the group. For the first time the doctors weren't looking at their charts. They were looking at her. "Doctor," Hamilton's jaw clenched, "you expect us to take the word of a 9-year-old? But before Amara could answer, a nurse burst into the room, breathless. "Doctor, Mr. Kane's vitals are plummeting again." The monitors blared as the billionaire convulsed, his body arching against the bed. Chaos erupted. Nurses rushing with syringes, doctors shouting instructions. Amid the storm, Amara clutched her notebook tighter and shouted over the noise, "Test the cream. You'll see I'm right. Please, you're wasting time." Her words cut through the chaos like a blade. For a heartbeat, the room hung suspended. Then Dr. Rivera snatched the jar from the nightstand, unscrewed the lid, and inhaled sharply. His face paled. "It has a metallic odor," he whispered. "We need toxicology on this immediately." Reluctantly, Dr. Hamilton gestured to the lab team. "Fine, run it." The jar disappeared into hurried hands. Samples were rushed out the door. The tension was suffocating as the minutes dragged. The billionaire's life measured in blaring alarms and failing numbers. Amara stood frozen, every muscle trembling. Her mother clutched her shoulders, whispering prayers, but Amara's eyes stayed fixed on the door. Finally, a toxicologist burst back into the suite, face stricken. "Confirmed. Significant levels of thallium detected." The room erupted, shouts of disbelief, cries of recognition, pages of charts tossed aside. Orders flew rapid fire. "Start Prussian blue immediately. Prepare chelation therapy. Alert pharmacy." Amara sagged in relief, her notebook slipping from her shaking hands. They had listened. At last, Dr. Rivera turned toward her, awe in his voice. "You saved him." Around the room heads turned. Doctors who had ignored her now stared with something new in their eyes. Respect, disbelief, shame. Dr. Hamilton's voice faltered as he looked at the child he had just dismissed. How did you see what we all missed?" Amara swallowed hard, her voice soft but steady. "Because you don't see me. I'm invisible, so I see things you don't." The words hung in the air, undeniable. And in that moment, a 9-year-old girl had broken through the wall of disbelief, forcing 20 of the nation's best doctors to face the truth they had overlooked. The transformation was almost immediate. As the antidote coursed through Robert Kane's veins, the storm of alarms began to quiet. The spasms eased. His chest rose and fell in steadier rhythm. Color crept faintly back into his cheeks. For hours the doctors hovered like hawks, adjusting doses, monitoring vitals, recalculating every number. Slowly, impossibly, the billionaire's body fought its way back from the brink. The man who had been pronounced all but lost was stabilizing, not because of 20 world-class specialists, but because a 9-year-old girl had refused to stay silent. When the final wave of chaos settled, the room was different. The arrogance that had once filled the air was gone, replaced by humility and awe. Dr. Rivera approached Amara first. He crouched so his eyes met hers, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved his life. Do you understand that? All of us, and it was you who saw the truth." Her cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her scuffed sneakers. "I just noticed the pattern," she whispered. Behind him the other doctors murmured in disbelief, trading guilty glances. For hours they had dismissed her, the quiet girl in the corner, the cleaner's daughter, and yet she had done what none of them could. Robert Kane stirred faintly in the bed, his eyes fluttering open. His voice was a fragile whisper, but the words were clear. "Who saved me?" Every head turned toward the child clutching a battered notebook. Amara froze under the weight of his gaze, but Dr. Rivera gently guided her forward. "It was her," he said softly. "This little girl." Kane's lips curved in the faintest smile, the gratitude of a man who had faced death and returned. His trembling hand lifted weakly, searching. Amara hesitated, then reached out, her small fingers closing around his. In that moment, the hierarchy of the room flipped. The billionaire, the doctors, the nurses, all of them looked to the 9-year-old girl as if she were the authority, the one who mattered. Her mother, Denise, stood near the door, tears glistening on her cheeks. For years she had scrubbed floors invisible to those in power. But tonight, her daughter had shattered that invisibility in a single act of courage. Applause began softly, awkwardly at first, then building. The doctors, men and women with awards, publications, careers built on prestige, clapped for a little girl in a threadbare sweater and worn sneakers. Amara's heart swelled, her eyes shining. For once she wasn't invisible, she was undeniable. The crisis had passed, but the story was only beginning. In the days that followed, Robert Kane's strength returned. The antidote flushed the poison from his body, and with each sunrise his voice grew steadier, his movements stronger. News of his survival spread through the hospital like wildfire, whispered in corridors, printed in hushed updates. But the detail that traveled fastest was not the antidote. It was the name of the child who had saved him. Amara Johnson. Once invisible, she now found herself at the center of every conversation. Doctors who had brushed past her without a glance now bent down to ask her questions. Nurses who had once hushed her now smiled proudly when she passed. Even the hospital director, who had never noticed her mother polishing the floors, came personally to shake Amara's hand. For Amara, the sudden attention felt overwhelming. She wasn't used to being seen, to voices speaking her name with respect. Yet in her small chest, pride bloomed quietly, not the loud pride of arrogance, but the soft pride of someone who had simply done what was right. Her mother wept when Robert Kane himself asked to meet them privately. He sat upright now, dressed in a silk robe, still frail but with the commanding aura of a man who had wrestled death and won. When Amara entered the room, clutching her notebook, his eyes softened. "Come here," he said, his voice a rasp but filled with warmth. She approached hesitantly, and he reached for her hand. "You saved my life, not because you had power, not because you had status, but because you saw what others refused to see." His eyes glistened. "Never let anyone convince you that your voice doesn't matter." He turned to Denise, who stood trembling with emotion. "And you," he said, "raised a daughter with the courage to change the course of lives. That's a legacy greater than all the wealth I've ever built." Tears streaked down Denise's cheeks as she embraced her daughter. For years, she had told Amara to stay invisible, to survive quietly in a world that did not notice them. But her daughter had broken that rule, and in doing so saved a man whose wealth could buy everything but truth. Word spread beyond the hospital walls. News outlets picked up the story, amazed by the little girl who had seen what 20 doctors missed. Journalists called her the invisible genius, the girl with eyes sharper than science. But for Amara, the labels didn't matter. What mattered was that she had learned a truth she would carry forever. Invisibility was not weakness. Sometimes it was power, because when no one sees you, you see everything. and that gift could change the world. Amara's story wasn't just about saving one man. It was about what happens when the world dismisses the quiet ones, the overlooked, the invisible, and how sometimes those very voices hold the answers that can change everything. 20 of America's top doctors had access to the best machines, the most advanced training, and unlimited resources, yet they missed the truth that was sitting in plain sight. Why? Because they didn't think to listen to a little black girl with a notebook in her lap. They didn't see her. But invisibility can be a strange kind of power. While others are blinded by ego, by noise, by reputation, the invisible ones notice the patterns nobody else sees. They carry truths the world ignores, and when they finally dare to speak, they can shake even the highest halls of power. Amara was only 9 years old. She didn't have a degree. She didn't have authority. What she had was courage, the courage to stand up, even when her voice trembled, even when the room full of experts told her to sit down. And because she refused to stay silent, a billionaire who had everything except an answer lived to see another sunrise. Maybe you felt invisible too. Maybe you've been overlooked, dismissed, told that your ideas don't matter. But remember, Amara, remember that invisibility doesn't mean you lack value. Sometimes it means you're seeing what no one else will, and if you dare to speak, even when the world ignores you, you might just save a life, change a story, or rewrite history. So here's the truth. The invisible can become visible. The powerless can rise. The quiet can be heard. And if you believe in stories like these, stories of underdogs, of courage, of those who refuse to stay silent, then this is the place for you. Subscribe, because the world needs to see what it's been ignoring. Because invisible doesn't stay invisible forever.